June 17th, 2019. A private room at her Manhattan townhouse on East 67th Street. Gloria Vanderbilt, 95 years old, lay dying in the home she had filled with art, books, and memories of a life that spanned nearly a century. Around her, the possessions she had collected, paintings, sculptures, fabrics, found objects arranged with an artist's eye. Her son, Anderson Cooper, held her hand. The fortune that bore her name, the legendary Vanderbilt wealth that had once been the largest in America, was gone. The trust fund she had inherited, worth $5 million in 1924, equivalent to roughly $80 million today, had been consumed across 4 marriages, countless homes, endless reinventions. The woman who had been born Gloria Laura Vanderbilt, whose very name suggested limitless wealth, whose great-great-grandfather had died as the richest man in America, left an estate valued at less than $1.5 million. She had lived through the dissolution of America's greatest fortune. She had married 4 times, seeking love and finding complications. She had spent decades trying to access money that was hers, but not hers, controlled, but not controllable. And in the end, she had done what no Vanderbilt had done before. She had made her own fortune, built her own empire, created her own wealth independent of the name she carried. This is the story of how a girl born into American aristocracy watched her inheritance disappear, married her way through 4 different versions of what love and security might mean, lost fortunes both inherited and earned, and survived it all with an artist's soul and a survivor's determination. But to understand Gloria Vanderbilt's shocking divorces and financial losses, we must first understand the fortune itself, where it came from, and how quickly even the greatest wealth in American history could vanish. The Vanderbilt fortune was born on Staten Island ferry boats. Cornelius Vanderbilt, Gloria's great-great-grandfather, began with nothing. Born in 1794 to a poor farming family, he quit school at 11, borrowed $100 from his mother at 16, and bought a small ferry boat. The year was 1810. For the next 67 years, Cornelius Vanderbilt would build, intimidate, bribe, and ruthlessly compete his way to becoming the wealthiest American of his age. His first fortune came from steamships. By the 1840s, he controlled most shipping routes along the East Coast. He undercut competitors until they sold to him or went bankrupt. He bribed politicians for favorable legislation. He extracted tribute from California gold rush miners desperate for passage to San Francisco. The newspapers called him Commodore, a title he had given himself. Workers called him worse. In 1863, at age 70, when most men contemplated retirement, Cornelius pivoted to railroads. He understood that railroads were the future of American commerce. He bought the New York and Harlem Railroad, then the Hudson River Railroad, then the New York Central. He connected New York to Chicago, creating the first great railroad empire. His methods were brutal. He watered stock, manipulated markets, crushed labor strikes, bribed legislators, and built monopolies that strangled competition. The Commodore cared nothing for public opinion and everything for profit. When he died on January 4th, 1877, Cornelius Vanderbilt's fortune was estimated at $100 million, equivalent to roughly $2.5 billion today. It was the largest fortune ever amassed in America to that point. His son William Henry Vanderbilt inherited $95 million of it. The Commodore had famously disinherited most of his children, believing them weak or unsuitable. William proved him wrong. A meticulous manager rather than a bold visionary, William nearly doubled the fortune in just 8 years. By his death in 1885, the Vanderbilt wealth stood at nearly $200 million, approximately $5 billion today. William built grand mansions on Fifth Avenue, collected art, and tried to transform the Vanderbilt name from robber baron to American royalty. He partially succeeded. His children and grandchildren would dominate Gilded Age society. build palatial estates from New York to Newport, marry European aristocrats, and live as American princes and princesses. The wealth seemed infinite. The mansions multiplied. The Breakers in Newport, Marble House, Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, with its 250 rooms, multiple Fifth Avenue palaces, country estates, yachts, private rail cars. The third generation of Vanderbilts, William's grandchildren, numbered 12 and divided the fortune among them. Each inheritance was still substantial, measured in tens of millions. This was the generation that truly lived the Gilded Age dream. They married into European nobility, collected art and jewels, and maintained multiple estates, employed hundreds of servants, and believed their wealth would last forever. They were wrong. By 1924, when Gloria was born, the Vanderbilt fortune was already fracturing. The vast railroad empire was being challenged by automobiles and regulation. The mansions were becoming impossibly expensive to maintain. Income taxes, introduced in 1913, began eating into capital. The fourth generation, numbering in the dozens, was receiving smaller inheritances, and they were spending faster than the money could regenerate. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, Gloria's father, was a perfect example of fourth-generation dissolution. Born in 1880, Reggie Vanderbilt inherited $7 million at age 21, equivalent to about $220 million today. He never worked a day in his life. He didn't need to. And he pursued horses, yachts, gambling, drinking, and women. He married twice. His first wife, Kathleen Nielsen, came from respectable society. They had one daughter, also named Kathleen. The marriage failed, scandalously ending in divorce in 1920. Society frowned. Vanderbilts were supposed to maintain appearances. Reggie didn't care. In 1923, at age 43, he married Gloria Morgan, an 18-year-old beauty from a socially ambitious but not particularly wealthy family. Gloria Morgan's twin sister, Thelma, would become famous as the mistress of Edward, Prince of Wales. The Morgan twins knew how to marry money. Reggie was handsome, charming, rich, and self-destructive. On February 20th, 1924, at the Lying-in Hospital on East 70th Street in Manhattan, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt gave birth to a daughter. Yet they named her Gloria Laura Vanderbilt. The baby was born into a world of privilege that was already crumbling. The household maintained a Fifth Avenue townhouse, a summer estate called Sandy Point Farm on Shelter Island, multiple servants, drivers, nurses. But Reggie's fortune was evaporating. He drank heavily, gambled compulsively, and made disastrous investments. By the time Gloria was 15 months old, her father's health was failing. Years of alcoholism had destroyed his liver. On September 4th, 1925, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt died at Sandy Point Farm. He was 45 years old. His fortune, once $7 million, was almost gone. He left an estate of less than $1 million, most of it in a trust for baby Gloria. And the $5 million trust that would define Gloria's life came from a combination of her father's remaining assets and family contributions designed to prevent the child from being penniless. The trust's terms were specific and restrictive. Gloria would receive the income from the trust, but not the principal. Control rested with guardians and trustees. She could not touch the bulk of the money until she reached 21. Her mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, received a mere $4,000 per year from the estate for the child's care, barely enough to maintain the lifestyle she craved. This would prove catastrophic. Gloria's childhood was spent between two worlds, neither of them stable. Her mother, young and beautiful and determined to maintain her social position, moved between New York, Paris, and London. In dragging her daughter along, they lived in expensive hotels, employed French maids and English nannies, socialized with European aristocracy and American expatriates. But they were living on borrowed money and borrowed time. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt was spending far more than her widow's allowance. She was dipping into her daughter's trust income, using the child's money to fund her own life. By 1932, the arrangement was unsustainable. Gloria Morgan had moved semi-permanently to Europe, leaving her daughter in the care of a nurse, Emma Kieslich. Young Gloria saw her mother rarely. She was a lonely child in expensive hotels, speaking French with her nurse, missing her absent mother, aware that something was wrong but unable to articulate what. The trustees, particularly Gloria's paternal aunt Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, were growing alarmed. Gertrude Whitney, sister to Gloria's dead father, was herself an heiress to Vanderbilt wealth. But unlike many of her generation, she had done something with her privilege. She had become a serious sculptor and art patron, founding the Whitney Museum of American Art. She was disciplined, accomplished, and appalled by her sister-in-law's behavior. In 1932, Gertrude began quietly gathering evidence of Gloria Morgan's unfitness as a mother. She documented the child's neglect, the mother's affairs, the questionable companions, the unstable living arrangements. And in 1934, when Gloria was 10 years old, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney sued her mother for custody. The trial became the scandal of the decade. Newspapers called it the trial of the century, the matter of Vanderbilt, the poor little rich girl case. And it had everything: enormous wealth, maternal unfitness, lesbian affairs, international society, a tragic child caught in the middle. The proceedings began on October 1st, 1934, in New York State Supreme Court. Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt arrived each day dressed in expensive furs, her beauty on full display, her panic barely concealed. Gertrude Whitney appeared dignified and severe, confident in her moral superiority. Young Gloria, now 10 years old, was the prize they fought over. The testimony was devastating. Nurse Kieslich described years of maternal neglect, the child left alone for months while her mother partied in Europe. Hotel staff testified about Gloria Morgan's drinking, her male visitors, her nights out dancing. Most sensationally, the nurse testified about witnessing intimate behavior between Gloria Morgan and her friend Nadine, Sir Lady Milford Haven, suggesting a lesbian relationship. The press reported it all in coded but unmistakable language. Gloria Morgan fought back, portraying Gertrude as a rich, cold aunt trying to steal a mother's child. But the evidence overwhelmed her defense. On November 21st, 1934, Justice John Francis Carew granted custody to Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, with limited visitation rights for the mother. 10-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt went to live with her aunt at the Whitney estate in Old Westbury, Long Island, and later at the Whitney Mansion at 871 Fifth Avenue. The newspapers proclaimed that the little heiress had been rescued. The reality was more complex. Gertrude Whitney's household was wealthy, cultured, and emotionally reserved. Gloria attended the Greenvale School and later Miss Porter's School in Farmington, Connecticut, where wealthy girls received finishing education designed to prepare them for good marriages rather than careers. She saw her mother on weekends, awkward visits, supervised and strained. The trust continued to generate income, approximately $100,000 per year, by the late 1930s, equivalent to nearly $2 million today. But Gloria couldn't touch it. The trustees controlled everything. They paid her school bills, her clothing allowances, her living expenses. She had to request permission for anything beyond basic needs. She was an heiress who couldn't access her inheritance, wealthy on paper and powerless in practice. This would be the pattern of her life until she turned 21. The custody battle had taught her that money meant control, that families fought over fortunes, that love and wealth were dangerously entangled. These lessons would shape every choice she made. At 17, Gloria was strikingly beautiful, with dark hair, pale skin, and the kind of refined features that photographed beautifully. She was also desperate to escape from her aunt's suffocating propriety, from the memory of the custody trial, from the expectation that she would marry someone suitable and disappear into conventional society. In 1941, at age 17, She thought she found that escape in Pat DiCicco. Pasquale DiCicco was 31 years old, a Hollywood agent with organized crime connections and a violent temper that Gloria didn't recognize until too late. Born in 1909 to Italian immigrant parents, DiCicco had drifted into the entertainment industry through his friendship with Howard Hughes and his connections to Lucky Luciano's crime syndicate. He was handsome, exciting, dangerous, everything that Gertrude Whitney's staid world was not. He had previously been married to actress Thelma Todd, whose mysterious death in 1935 had never been fully explained, and which some suspected DiCicco of causing. Gloria knew none of this, or chose not to know. She saw only an escape route. They married on December 28, 1941, 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, at the Santa Barbara home of DiCicco's friend. Gloria was 17 years old and required her aunt's permission. Gertrude refused to attend. The marriage was a disaster from the beginning. DiCicco was controlling, jealous, and according to Gloria's later accounts, physically abusive. He monitored her movements, restricted her friendships, and erupted in rages. Gloria later described him hitting her, once knocking her unconscious. The marriage settlement had been negotiated before the wedding. DiCicco brought nothing financially. Gloria brought her trust income, now entirely under her control as a married woman, and her expectation of receiving the principal when she turned 21. The prenuptial agreement was minimal. Upon marriage, Gloria's annual income of approximately $120,000, equivalent to $2 million today, became available for household expenses. They established themselves in a house in Beverly Hills, employed servants, entertained Hollywood figures, and spent money at an alarming rate. But DiCicco had no income beyond what he could extract from his marginal Hollywood activities and his wife's trust. He was, in effect, living off her money while asserting complete authority over how it was spent. Gloria later estimated that during their 4-year marriage, they spent nearly $500,000 of trust income, equivalent to roughly $8 million today, with nothing to show for it. No property purchased, no investments made, just consumed in the daily expenses of maintaining a lifestyle neither had earned. The physical abuse intensified. By 1945, Gloria had had enough. On April 23, 1945, she filed for divorce in Los Angeles Superior Court, citing extreme cruelty. She was 21 years old, finally of age to control her trust principal, and determined to escape. The divorce was finalized quickly. DiCicco contested nothing, perhaps aware that any detailed testimony about his behavior might expose him to worse consequences. The settlement gave him nothing. Gloria retained all her property and money, but the marriage had cost her dearly. The 4 years with DiCicco had consumed approximately $500,000 of trust income. She had gained nothing financially and lost years of capital accumulation. She had also learned that marriage to the wrong man could be financially and physically dangerous. The lesson didn't prevent her from marrying again almost immediately. 1 month after her divorce was final, Gloria married Leopold Stokowski. Leopold Stokowski was 63 years old, one of the most famous symphony conductors in America, recently divorced from heiress Gloria Vanderbilt's distant cousin, and utterly unsuitable by Gertrude Whitney's standards. The marriage, on April 21, 1945, represented Gloria's second attempt at escape, this time through art and culture rather than Hollywood excitement. Stokowski brought intellectual prestige and international fame. He brought no money. His conducting career generated income, but he had expensive tastes, multiple properties, and alimony obligations. Gloria brought her trust, now fully under her control. At 21, she finally had access to the principal, approximately $5 million in securities and trusts. The marriage settlement negotiations revealed a now familiar pattern. Stokowski's lawyers proposed that Gloria's money remain separate, managed by her trustees, with Stokowski having no claim to principal. Gloria agreed, perhaps still cautious after DiCicco. But in practice, her money funded their lifestyle. They established multiple residences, a townhouse at 10 Gracie Square overlooking the East River in Manhattan, purchased for $90,000, equivalent to $1.3 million today, a country house in Connecticut, and later a house in California. They employed full household staffs. They traveled extensively to Stokowski's conducting engagements. They entertained lavishly. The monthly household costs exceeded $10,000, equivalent to $150,000 today. Annually, they were spending at least $150,000, equivalent to over $2 million today, far more than the trust income could generate. This required invading the principal. Trustees resisted. Gloria insisted. Slowly, the $5 million trust began shrinking. In 1947, Gloria gave birth to their first son, Christopher Stokowski. In 1950, their second son, Leopold Stanislaus Stokowski, was born. The children required nannies, nurses, and eventually private schools. The family expenses grew while the trust declined. By 1950, Gloria had spent approximately $1 million of principal, 20% of her inherited wealth. The marriage was also deteriorating. The 42-year age gap created inevitable strains. Stokowski was from another era, set in his habits, demanding in his needs. Gloria was young, creative, restless, seeking her own identity beyond being Mrs. Stokowski. She began studying art, painting, trying to develop her own creative voice. Stokowski, accustomed to being the sole star in any relationship, found this threatening. They grew apart, maintaining separate social circles, separate bedrooms, separate lives within the same houses. By 1954, the marriage was effectively over. On October 29, 1955, Gloria filed for divorce in Reno, Nevada, citing extreme cruelty in the legally required but largely formulaic complaint. Stokowski contested the divorce, perhaps hoping to extract a settlement. The legal battle lasted months. The final decree, granted in 1955, gave Stokowski nothing from Gloria's trust, but required Gloria to pay substantial legal costs, approximately $30,000. She also agreed to maintain a home for the children and cover their expenses. The total cost of her marriage to Stokowski, approximately $1.2 million of trust, principal spent on houses, household expenses and living costs, plus legal fees, plus ongoing child support. Of the $5 million inheritance, roughly $3.8 million remained. She was 31 years old and had been through 2 failed marriages. The lesson remained unlearned. In 1956, Gloria married Sidney Lumet. This time, she married her equal. Lumet, 32, was an emerging film director, talented, intellectual, ambitious, and poor. Born in Philadelphia to Jewish theatre people, Lumet had worked his way up through television and was about to direct his first major film, 12 Angry Men. He brought talent and potential. Gloria brought her diminished fortune. The marriage settlement was more carefully structured this time. Lumet's lawyer negotiated a prenuptial agreement that kept Gloria's remaining trust assets separate. Lumet would have no claim on her principal, but he also made clear that he didn't want to live off her money, and he intended to support them with his earnings. This was refreshing. For the first time, Gloria was marrying someone who had his own career and didn't see her primarily as a bank account. They bought a house at 168 East 72nd Street in Manhattan for $160,000, taking out a mortgage rather than using her trust. This was sensible financial management, something Gloria had never practiced before. Lumet's directing career flourished. In 1957, he directed 12 Angry Men, which became a critical success. More films followed. The Fugitive Kind, Long Day's Journey into Night, Failsafe. His income grew. For the first time in her life, Gloria was in a marriage where money flowed in rather than just out. The household expenses were split. Her trust could finally stabilize. By 1960, approximately $3.5 million remained in principal. generating about $150,000 annually in income. Combined with Lumet's growing earnings, they were genuinely prosperous. But the marriage failed for reasons having nothing to do with money. They were both strong-willed, creative people who grew in different directions. Gloria wanted to develop her own artistic identity. She began designing fabrics, studying painting more seriously, exploring her creative potential. Lumet was intensely focused on his films, working 16-hour days, traveling for shoots, absorbed in his craft. They had no children together. They had increasingly little in common. By 1963, they were living separate lives. The divorce, filed in Juarez, Mexico on August 7, 1963, was amicable and quick. The settlement was fair. Lumet took nothing from her trust. They divided the house proceeds. Legal costs were minimal. The marriage to Lumet had been Gloria's most financially successful. Instead of depleting her inheritance, she had stabilized it. The trust still held approximately $3.4 million in principal. She was 39 years old, 3 times divorced, and finally beginning to understand that marriage and money were separate questions, requiring separate answers. Then she met Wyatt Cooper, and for the first time, she got both answers. Wyatt Emery Cooper was a writer from Mississippi, 40 years old, kind, intelligent, psychologically astute, and completely uninterested in her money. Born in 1927 to a poor family in Quitman, Mississippi, Cooper had educated himself, moved to New York, worked as an actor briefly, and turned to writing. He was working on screenplays and beginning to write seriously about family, memory, and Southern identity. He met Gloria at a dinner party in 1963. She was immediately drawn to his warmth, his emotional intelligence, his complete lack of mercenary motivation. He was drawn to her creativity, vulnerability, and complexity. They talked for hours. They began dating seriously. For the first time since her childhood, Gloria felt genuinely loved for herself, rather than her name or money. They married on December 24, 1963, in a small ceremony. The prenuptial agreement was simple. Gloria's trust remained entirely hers. Cooper wanted nothing from it. He would support the family with his writing income. This was more symbolic than practical since his writing income was modest, but the principle mattered. So they bought a house at 30 Beekman Place, overlooking the East River, for $250,000. They furnished it beautifully, filled it with art and books and comfort. They entertained friends. They created a real home. In 1965, Gloria gave birth to Carter Vanderbilt Cooper. In 1967, their second son, Anderson Hayes Cooper, was born. Gloria was 43 at Anderson's birth, thrilled to be a mother again, determined to create the stable childhood she had never had. Wyatt was a devoted father, present and engaged in ways that Stokowski had never been. The family life was genuinely happy. Wyatt wrote screenplays and eventually published a memoir. Families, a Memoir and a Celebration, exploring themes of family, belonging, and love. Gloria supported his writing emotionally and, when necessary, financially. But she was also developing her own career. In 1968, she began seriously pursuing textile design. She painted canvases that were converted into fabric patterns. In 1970, she founded Gloria Vanderbilt Textiles. The timing was perfect. The American fashion industry was democratizing, moving beyond haute couture to ready-to-wear. Designers were becoming brands. In 1976, at age 52, Gloria made the decision that would define her financial future. She licensed her name to Murjani Corporation for designer jeans. The Gloria Vanderbilt jeans, featuring her signature and a swan logo on the back pocket, launched in 1978. They were an immediate sensation. The designer jean market was exploding. Calvin Klein, Jordache, Sergio Valente were all competing for market share. But Gloria's jeans stood out. They fit well, looked elegant, and carried a name that suggested both accessibility and aristocracy. By 1980, Gloria Vanderbilt jeans were generating annual sales of over $200 million. Gloria's licensing royalties were earning her more money than her trust ever had. In the best years of the early 1980s, she was making more than $5 million annually from the jeans alone, plus additional income from perfumes, accessories, and other licensed products bearing her name. For the first time in her life, Gloria Vanderbilt was wealthy because of her own efforts rather than her inheritance. The irony was complete. The Vanderbilt fortune that had once seemed infinite had dwindled through generations of division and spending. By the 1980s, most Vanderbilt descendants were living on reputations rather than fortunes. But Gloria, shown through creativity and business sense, had rebuilt wealth. The marriage to Wyatt remained strong through these years of success. He was proud of her accomplishments, never threatened by her growing income. They raised their sons in relative normalcy, given the circumstances. Anderson attended Dalton School in Manhattan, then Yale University, showing early interest in journalism. Carter, more troubled, struggled with depression and addiction. On January 5, 1978, Wyatt Cooper died during open-heart surgery. He was 50 years old. Gloria was devastated. The marriage had lasted 14 years, the only genuinely happy marriage of her life. The financial settlement was irrelevant since Wyatt owned nothing of the estate. His death created no financial complications, only emotional devastation. Gloria was 53, widowed, yet wealthy from her own work, and grief-stricken. The 1980s brought both triumph and tragedy. Her fashion empire continued to thrive. She expanded into home goods, perfumes, accessories, always licensing rather than manufacturing, collecting royalties that required minimal involvement. By 1985, her annual income from licensing exceeded $7 million. The trust that had once defined her wealth now represented a small fraction of her assets. She maintained multiple homes, employed staff, traveled extensively, lived well. She had finally achieved the financial security and independence that had eluded her through 4 marriages. But on July 22, 1988, her son Carter jumped to his death from the terrace of her 14th floor apartment at 30 Beekman Place. He was 23 years old. Gloria was present in the apartment, trying to talk him down from the wall. She watched him fall. The tragedy destroyed her. Anderson, then 21 and working as a young journalist, became her support. The fashion business continued, but Gloria withdrew from public life. The losses accumulated. In the early 1990s, the designer jean market collapsed. Tastes changed. The brands that had defined the 1980s seemed dated. Her licensing revenues declined sharply. By 1995, her income had dropped to under $1 million annually. She had lived through the rise and fall of her fashion empire, just as she had lived through the rise and fall of the Vanderbilt fortune. The financial accounting of Gloria's 4 marriages reveals a complex story of loss and recovery. And the first marriage to DiCicco cost her approximately $500,000 in consumed trust income and lost investment growth. The second marriage to Stokowski cost her approximately $1.2 million in principal and accumulated expenses. The third marriage to Lumet was financially neutral, perhaps even slightly positive, given the real estate appreciation during their years together. The fourth marriage to Cooper was financially stable, neither depleting nor dramatically increasing her wealth, but providing the foundation for her eventual business success. The total direct cost of her marriages, approximately $1.7 million from her original $5 million inheritance, but the indirect costs were higher. The early years of financial chaos, from age 21 to 39, prevented proper wealth management. The money that could have been invested and compounded instead was spent on household expenses, multiple homes, divorces, and the general chaos of unstable living. A conservatively invested $5 million in 1945, compounded at 6% annually, would have grown to over $100 million by 2000. Instead, Gloria's trust principle was essentially depleted by the 1980s. The house at Beekman Place was sold in 2000. Gloria moved to a smaller but still elegant apartment on East 67th Street. She continued painting, writing, creating. Anderson's journalism career flourished at CNN, providing him with independent wealth and relieving her of any concern about leaving a fortune to her children. In her final years, Gloria lived comfortably but not opulently, and her licensing deals had largely expired. The Gloria Vanderbilt brand existed but generated minimal revenue. Her assets consisted primarily of her apartment, artwork, personal possessions, and remaining investment accounts. The estate she left upon her death in 2019 was valued at approximately $1.3 million, a small fraction of what she had inherited, an even smaller fraction of what the original Vanderbilt fortune had been, but honestly earned through her own creativity and labor. She left everything to Anderson Cooper, who gracefully declined most of it, insisting the money be donated to charity. This was the final act in the long drama of the Vanderbilt fortune, the greatest fortune in American history, created by a ruthless ferryboat captain, multiplied by a careful son, dissipated by succeeding generations. And finally, in Gloria's case, both lost and recreated by her own hand. The four marriages represented four attempts to find security, love, identity, and escape. The first marriage to DiCicco was an attempt to escape her suffocating childhood and claim independence. It taught her that bad men could be financially and physically dangerous. The second marriage to Stokowski was an attempt to escape into art and culture, to find identity through a famous man's reflected glory. It taught her that age gaps and dependence create resentment. The third marriage to Lumet was an attempt to find an equal partner who wouldn't see her as a bank account. It taught her that equality and compatibility are different things. The fourth marriage to Cooper was the marriage that finally worked, based on genuine love, mutual respect, and complete financial independence. It taught her what all the money could never teach, that security comes from character, not capital. The pattern of Gilded Age fortunes repeats endlessly. Cornelius Vanderbilt built an empire through ruthlessness and vision. His children and grandchildren lived like royalty. His great-grandchildren struggled to maintain appearances. By the fourth and fifth generation, the money was largely gone. In 1973, a family reunion of Vanderbilt descendants drew 120 relatives. Not one of them was a millionaire from Vanderbilt money alone. The mansions had been sold or demolished. The Breakers and Marble House were museum pieces. The Fifth Avenue palaces were gone, replaced by apartment buildings and shops. The fortune that had seemed infinite lasted exactly 100 years from its peak. From William Henry Vanderbilt's death in 1885 to the 1970s, when the last substantial Vanderbilt wealth evaporated. Gloria's story is exceptional only in its visibility. Thousands of Gilded Age fortunes followed similar trajectories. The difference between fortunes that survived and fortunes that didn't came down to structure, character, and discipline. The fortunes that survived had ironclad trusts, professional management, and heirs who understood stewardship rather than consumption. The Rockefeller fortune survived largely intact because John D. Rockefeller created trusts so tight that even his children couldn't dissolve them. The Mellon fortune survived because family members entered banking and business, regenerating wealth rather than merely consuming it. The Vanderbilt fortune failed because it was divided too widely, was protected too weakly, and consumed too enthusiastically. Gloria's particular vulnerability came from being female in an era when women's property rights were limited and financial education was considered unnecessary for girls. When she inherited her trust at age 21 in 1945, she had received zero financial education. No one had taught her about investment, compound interest, capital preservation, or wealth management. She knew how to spend money, not how to manage it. Her trustees had managed the trust for her childhood, but had provided no education in how to manage it herself. The result was predictable. She spent it. The marriages accelerated the spending because each marriage involved setting up households, maintaining appearances, and supporting husbands who brought little or nothing financially to the union. So even when she tried to be careful, as with the prenuptial agreements in her later marriages, the practical reality was that her money funded their lifestyle. The trust structure itself was flawed. It provided income but not education. It protected her from complete destitution, but not from gradual impoverishment. It gave her money but not knowledge, capital but not competence. This was common for wealthy women of her generation. They were protected from total loss, but not from slow financial decline. The miracle of Gloria's story is not that she lost the Vanderbilt inheritance. That was almost inevitable given the structure, her education, and the historical moment. The miracle is that she created her own fortune. In 1976, at age 52, when most people are preparing for retirement, Gloria Vanderbilt launched a fashion empire. And she did it through creativity, business instinct, and hard work. The genes bore her name, but she was actively involved in design, marketing, and brand management. She worked 12-hour days in her 70s. She negotiated licensing deals. She protected her brand. The fashion fortune she built was larger than the inheritance she had lost. The jeans generated over $200 million in sales at their peak, with Gloria earning approximately 10% in royalties. Over the 15-year run of the brand's greatest success, she earned approximately $30 to $40 million. This was real wealth, self-made, earned through her own efforts. The irony is complete. The Vanderbilt name that should have meant inherited security instead meant public scrutiny, family dysfunction, and financial vulnerability. But the Vanderbilt name also eventually meant fashion brand recognition, opening doors and creating opportunities. Gloria Vanderbilt, the heiress, lost her inheritance. Gloria Vanderbilt, the designer, made a fortune. They were the same person, separated by decades of hard experience. Today, the physical remnants of Gloria's life are scattered and sparse. The apartment on East 67th Street where she died was sold. Her artwork hangs in museums and private collections. Her papers reside at Columbia University. The houses she lived in have changed hands multiple times. The trust documents that controlled her inheritance for 21 years are stored in file boxes somewhere, legal artifacts of a vanished system. The jeans occasionally appear in vintage clothing stores, recognized now as 1980s artifacts rather than luxury items. The Vanderbilt mansions she visited as a child are museums. The Breakers in Newport, owned by her distant relatives, draws tourists who pay admission to gawk at Gilded Age excess. Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, the largest private home ever built in America, is still owned by Vanderbilt descendants, but operates as a tourist attraction and winery. The townhouse at 640 Fifth Avenue, where her grandfather lived, was demolished in 1947 to make way for an office building. The mansion at 57th Street and Fifth Avenue, where other Vanderbilts lived, is gone. The physical legacy of America's greatest fortune is largely reduced to museum pieces and memories. The lesson of Gloria Vanderbilt's 4 marriages and lost fortunes is not simple. It's not merely that inherited wealth disappears or that women were financial victims. So those things are true, but incomplete. The deeper lesson is about identity and self-creation. Gloria Vanderbilt spent the first half of her life trying to escape or fulfill the expectations attached to her name. She married unwisely 3 times, seeking freedom, identity, or love through relationships with men who couldn't provide what she needed. She spent her inheritance maintaining appearances and funding lifestyles she hadn't chosen. The custody battle of 1934 had taught her that she was property to be fought over, that her wealth made her valuable but vulnerable, that love and money were dangerously mixed. These lessons crippled her financial judgment for decades. But somewhere between her third and fourth marriages, between age 39 and 43, something shifted. She married Wyatt Cooper because she loved him, and not because he offered escape or validation. She began developing her own creative work, not to fill time, but to build identity. And eventually she transformed herself from passive heiress to active entrepreneur. The fortune she built herself mattered more than the fortune she inherited, not because it was larger, but because it was hers. For modern wealthy women, Gloria's story offers both warning and inspiration. The warning is that wealth without knowledge is vulnerability, that marriage without prenuptial protection is financial suicide, that depending on inheritance is depending on sand. The trust fund culture that dominated wealthy families in the early 20th century created passive heirs who consumed without creating, spent without earning, and disappeared into comfortable irrelevance. Gloria could have followed that path, and many of her contemporaries did. The inspiration is that it's never too late to create your own wealth, that inherited money is less valuable than earned money, that creative work can generate financial independence. At age 52, Gloria Vanderbilt reinvented herself as a fashion mogul. She worked harder than she had ever worked, learned business skills she had never needed, negotiated deals she had never imagined. She succeeded spectacularly. The wealth she created didn't last forever either. Fashion is fickle, markets change, brands fade. By her death, she was comfortable but not spectacularly wealthy. But she had done what almost no Vanderbilt of her generation did. She had earned her own money, built her own empire, created her own identity independent of the name she inherited. The 4 marriages that punctuated her life represent 4 stages of consciousness. The marriage to DiCicco was the unconscious marriage, the desperate escape of a 17-year-old girl who thought any exit was better than the cage she knew. The marriage to Stokowski was the aspirational marriage, trying to become someone better through association with greatness. The marriage to Lumet was the equal marriage, seeking partnership and respect. The marriage to Cooper was the conscious marriage, built on genuine love and mutual understanding. Only the last marriage was truly successful, and it succeeded precisely because it didn't revolve around money. Wyatt Cooper didn't want her fortune, didn't try to control it, didn't resent it. His indifference to her wealth freed her to finally use it wisely. The fortune lost through the first 3 marriages, approximately $1.7 million in direct costs, plus unknown amounts in opportunity costs, represented the price of Gloria's education. She learned slowly and expensively that marriage and money are separate domains requiring separate judgment. She learned that love cannot be purchased but must be earned through character and compatibility. She learned that security comes from competence and creativity, not from passive inheritance. Gloria Vanderbilt died on June 17, 2019, at age 95, in her own home, surrounded by art she had created and collected, leaving an estate valued at $1.3 million to her surviving son, Anderson Cooper, who donated most of it to charity. The newspaper obituaries focused on her fashion empire, her tragic son's death. Shall her famous family name? Few mentioned that she had inherited $5 million and spent most of it. Fewer still noted that she had built her own fortune larger than her inheritance. The Vanderbilt name appeared in every headline, but the money it once represented was long gone. The fortune that Cornelius Vanderbilt had built from a $100 ferry boat, that William Vanderbilt had doubled to $200 million, that had created the most spectacular display of wealth in American history, existed now only as historical memory and museum admission fees. Gloria had lived through its final dissolution. She had been born into the last gasp of Gilded Age aristocracy, when the Vanderbilt name still meant something, when trust funds still seemed secure, when wealthy girls could imagine living their entire lives on inherited money. And she died in a different America, where trust funds were smaller or non-existent, where wealthy women worked, where inherited wealth was often less valuable than earned income. The arc of her life traced the arc of American wealth itself, from hereditary fortune to entrepreneurial self-creation. The 4 marriages, the 4 fortunes lost or spent or saved or earned, were stages in a very American journey from inheritance to independence, from passive heiress to active creator. The money came and went, as money always does. What remained was the story, instructive and cautionary, inspiring and tragic, uniquely Gloria's and universally human.